Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. We cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Jeremiah 43 and 44. Now remember, the Babylonians have invaded. The remnant are left behind. They had a king established who's been assassinated. And the leaders among the remnant have decided, this is cursed, this is not working, we are going to go to Egypt. And Jeremiah had warned them in the previous chapter. God says, don't go to Egypt, stay exactly where you are. So these two chapters describe their disobedience, the remnant packing up their bags and going to Egypt. Now, I suppose these chapters cause me to ask the questions. Why do people emigrate? There are various reasons that they do. And what are the perils of emigration? I mean, what we see in these texts is the families, the children, the women embracing the values of the Egyptians and the gods of the Egyptians, being swept away with the worldviews and the religions of the country that you're emigrating into. Big peril, not saying it's always wrong, big peril. What causes people to ignore the advice of God on big decisions like this, in terms of where you're going to live, where you're going to go, where you're going to work, etc.? What would cause people not to listen to God in that regard? And then what causes people to worship other gods? In this particular instance, it's clear that they think the Egyptians are more successful, the Egyptians are more wealthy, and if you worship what they worship, if you love what they worship, if you absorb their value system, you're going to succeed like them. So these are the questions that float through my mind as I go through these texts. So this is what it says in chapter 43. All the arrogant men and the leaders said to Jeremiah, "You're lying? When you said God said we mustn't go, God would never say that to us." So, verse 4, Johanna and all the army officers and all the people disobeyed the Lord's command, and they led away the remnant. And they took the women, they took the king's daughters, and they also dragged Jeremiah with them. So this must have been a forced, coercive immigration into Egypt. So they entered Egypt in disobedience of God, verse 7 says. And while the Jews are watching, Jeremiah takes some large stones, and he buries the stones in clay pots outside the gate to Pharaoh's palace. And he says, listen, this is what's going to happen. Then I'm going to send Nebuchadnezzar, God says, and he will set his throne over these stones. In other words, God's going to send his servant Nebuchadnezzar, who is a servant of judgment, into Egypt to overthrow the Egyptians, to burn down Egypt, to set up his throne in Egypt. So you think you're moving to a safe land, but actually you're moving from the frying pan into the fire. This is what God says to them. He will set fire to the temples of the gods of the Egyptians. And as a shepherd, look at this metaphor, as a shepherd picks his garment clean of rice, so will he pick Egypt clean and depart. Nebuchadnezzar is going to be like, he's going to come in, he's going to clean out the lice, which I'm assuming refers to the Israelites who have been in disobedience, and then he's going to leave Egypt. Again and again, God says, I sent my servants, the prophets, who said, why are you following the detestable practices of the people that you're living in? Over history, you can see that God warned his Israelites, and now he's doing it again. They were burning incense to the Egyptian gods. Verse 12 says, they will all perish in Egypt because God says, you are disobeying me, and now you're worshiping Egyptian gods. They're burning incense along to the Egyptian mother god. She's called the Queen of Heaven. The women were even making cakes in the image of the Queen of Heaven and worshiping the Egyptian gods. And when they were asked why they're doing it, they were saying, the Egyptians are blessed. The Egyptians are prosperous. The Egyptians are free. Obviously, their God is better than ours, so we're going to worship their gods. Crazy. And then God says, well, you go ahead and do what you're going to do. I'm going to keep my promise that I've prophesied through my servant Jeremiah. And so what challenge does God give me when I read this? Well, here I am standing along a road to nowhere, actually. I suppose at the great signposts of my life, the T-junctions of my life, I have resolved I'm going to inquire of God. Even if it doesn't seem logical to me, even if it doesn't seem like what I want to do, I want to know what God has to say about these things. Who will I marry? Where will I live? Where will I send my kids to school? Where will I work? Where will I go to church? Who will I submerge my family into? What community? Because that, just like we see with these Israelites, is going to affect the destiny of your children. I have a new grandson born into our household. My prayer for my son-in-law and my daughter is they're in a great community now. They're in the One Life community, but that they stay in good Christian community, because my children's children's children are going to be shaped by the people that they live with.